to talk about it, just like what we said earlier in our news bulletin, that we would have the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, Mr. Michael Freeman. He would discuss a little more about the attack. Today is October 7th, and it's 1 year since that attack happened. We would have him on Zoom live right now. Good morning, sir. Mr. Freeman, can you hear me?
I can. Good morning to you.
All right. It's been 1 year since this attack by Hamas, and I'm just wondering, really, how has this, in one way or another, shapen Israel's foreign policy and its security?
As you said, 1 year ago, October the 7th, everything changed. Everything changed in Israel. Thousands of Hamas terrorists came across the border from Gaza, and they came into Israel, and they came into our villages, and they came into our towns, and they came into our dance festival, where young people were dancing for peace, and they murdered, and they raped, and they butchered, and they burnt alive, and they tortured men, women, babies, children, grandparents, and 1,200 of them were murdered and butchered in cold blood, and a further 250 were taken hostage and were taken back to Gaza and put and held in the Hamas terror tunnels inside Gaza. And this profoundly changed who we are and what we are, and the way we see our neighbors, and certainly some of our neighbors. We understood on that day that Hamas is a terror organization that needs to be destroyed. If there's any future for peace, if there's ever going to be a chance of peace between Israel and the Palestinians and other neighbors, then Hamas cannot be part of that. They cannot be there. They need to be destroyed. They need to be wiped out, because this is the most brutal form of terrorism that the world has possibly ever seen. Some of the things that were carried out on October the 7th have never been carried out before. Some of the brutality, the sheer depravity of these terrorists that came across the border. And so as we remember a year on, we need to remember that Hamas is still holding 101 hostages. Hamas needs to release those hostages immediately. And last night, Hamas released a statement saying they were proud of what they did on October the 7th. They were proud of what's happened since, and they consider it a great achievement and a great success.
All right. I was just wondering, since that attack, what has Israel done to forestall any further attacks on Israel's soil?
So Israel has acted within Gaza to destroy the Hamas terror infrastructure, to destroy the Hamas tunnel network. You know, what we discovered when we went into Gaza was, and we knew that Hamas had been taking international aid and had been taking money and abusing it. What we didn't realize was the extent to which they built a massive tunnel network underground, bigger than the London Underground, longer than the London Underground, longer than the Paris Metro, longer than the New York subway. They built this massive underground network for their fighters and their terrorists and and to hold people in. They did nothing for the population. They did nothing for the Palestinians. And they built this network under schools, under hospitals, under mosques. And they used the mosques and the schools and the hospitals for terror centers and to store their rockets and to store their ammunition. And so we went in, we have been systematically destroying this system. We have been ensuring that they can't carry out their attacks. Only this morning, Hamas tried to launch further rockets. When we are holding memorial ceremonies to remember our dead and to remember the horrific attacks by Hamas, Hamas decided the way they wanted to remember this was by firing more rockets into civilian populations. Fortunately, our army spotted a large number of them and destroyed them before they were able to be fired. But 4 rockets were fired, 3 of them were shot down, and 1 of them landed harmlessly. But this is what Hamas wants to do. Hamas wants to continue. They've taken all the money that the world has given them, and instead of giving it to the Palestinians and building hospitals, they've used it to build terror systems.
Okay, so I'm just also wondering, what has been the international solidarity been like, especially from the African continent? To what extent have you received this sort of solidarity, and what role do you think that this partnership from around the world, play in the way and manner you relate with countries?
So, look, I think that any country that understands terrorism and understands what terrorism is and understands what extremism is, understands that what Israel is fighting. And unfortunately, the African continent has had its fair share of terrorism, has had its fair share of people who are killing and maiming for no reason other than evil ideology. And I think that all those people who understand that understand what Israel is fighting, and understand that today we've seen that in Lebanon, Hezbollah on October the 8th joined this war, encouraged by Iran to join this war. And they've for 11 months fired rockets, and Israel asked and pleaded for months and months and months, please stop the rocket fire. We have no dispute with Hezbollah, we have no dispute with Lebanon. There is no dispute between Israel and Lebanon over land or over territory. But Hezbollah, this terror organization sponsored by Iran, carried on firing rockets, carried on attacking us until we said enough, and we decided to fight back and to stop Hezbollah and to make Hezbollah implement United Nations Resolution 1701 that was passed in 2006 and called on Hezbollah not to attack Israel, to move back to the Litani River and to disarm. And since then they haven't done that, and the world haven't forced them to do that. So my message to our partners and to our friends, not only in Africa but around the world, is you need to pressure Hezbollah to implement 1701. You need to pressure Hamas to release the hostages immediately, 101, including a 1-year-old baby, including a 4-year-old child, including 80-year-old grandparents. When we think about this, they've been held in captivity for a year. Every single one of those hostages has marked, I don't want to say celebrated, but marked their birthday in a terror dungeon, in a tunnel underneath the ground. Every single one of them has spent a year in hellish conditions, and the world and our friends need to demand immediately their release. And our friends need to also say to Iran, who are sponsoring them, Iran who are funding them, Iran who are giving money and training and weapons, not only to Hamas, but to Hezbollah and to the Houthis and to the terror groups in Syria and to the terror groups in Iraq, you need to stop. Iran are also working to destabilize West Africa. And so we need to say to them, stop, and our partners need to say stop, because if we want a better future, we need to stop these terror organizations. We need to get Hezbollah to implement 1701, and we need to release the hostages immediately.
I can only imagine the excruciating pain that families are going through, after 1 year not seeing their loved ones. I understand there was even a protest in Tel Aviv yesterday with families asking that Israel authorities release the hostages. And I'm just wondering how is government reacting to that protest that happened. In fact, some of them accused the current government, stating clearly that the hostages are being sacrificed. I don't know what your reaction is to that.
I can't understand, and I can't feel the pain of those people who have loved ones being held in the worst conditions imaginable. Anything we can think of is worse. These people we know are being starved, they are being tortured, they are being abused, they are being sexually abused, they may well be being raped. And so we can't understand the pain of the families. But I can assure you that Israel is doing everything it can to release those hostages, to bring them home. And it's Hamas ultimately who are holding them. Hamas are the ones who kidnapped them, and Hamas are the ones who are refusing a ceasefire. They are refusing a ceasefire from across, from that the Americans have put on the table, that Israel has put on the table. Hamas have said clearly they're not interested in a ceasefire. They want a world war. They want a regional war. They don't want to have a ceasefire. So unfortunately, this is about Hamas, and this is about Hamas's unwillingness to have a to have a ceasefire. And so the pressure needs to be on Hamas. The pressure needs to be on Iran. And I understand the desperation of the families and their need to protest, and I'm certainly not going to criticize them. But I assure you that Israel is doing everything it can in order to bring these people home. But ultimately, this is Hamas who are holding them.
So is it possible that the Israeli government is not communicating properly to those who still have family and loved ones in captivity? Because, I mean, if they have this information, they shouldn't have been going out to the streets blaming the government for you know, not accepting the ceasefire and allowing the war to go on.
Ultimately, I'm not going to criticize anyone of any family. I'm not going to criticize anybody who's demonstrating. Israel is a democracy. It's a wonderful democracy where people can protest, there's a free press, an independent judiciary, and people can say what they want to say. And Israeli and the families are pressuring because they feel that the government's not doing enough, because from their perspective, until their children and their loved ones and their parents and their grandparents come home, then the government's not doing enough. And I understand that sentiment. But ultimately, this is Hamas, and this is Hamas that are carrying out these atrocities. It's Hamas that are holding the hostages, and it's Hamas that are refusing to come to the table. Americans and President Biden has said as much, that this is Hamas who are refusing the ceasefire. This is Hamas that are refusing the deal. And so we need to keep putting pressure and hope that eventually that Hamas will release the hostages.
Right. In fighting and going against terrorism, Hamas and Hezbollah now, a lot of people have actually accused the Israeli authorities of killing, civilians, harmless civilians in the cause of this war. In fact, in some cases, they blame you for genocide. How do you react to that particular blame?
So the accusation of genocide is baseless, it's outrageous, it's ridiculous. This war has been going on for just under a year because the war didn't start. The terrorism started on October the 7th. Israel's reaction started a number of weeks later. But in that time, unfortunately, many innocents have been killed in Gaza. Huge numbers of Hamas terrorists have been killed. We estimate that almost 20,000 of the dead in Gaza are Hamas terrorists. Unfortunately, in a war, innocent civilians do die. There's never been a war in history where innocent civilians have not died. And the death of innocent civilians is a tragedy. The death of one innocent civilian is an absolute tragedy. And my heart bleeds for all of those who were killed. We have to also understand why that's happened. And as difficult as it is for us to believe it, Hamas have built their entire command and control centers in civilian bases. They have their rockets inside houses. We saw that when a number of the hostages were released in a military operation, these hostages were being held in houses, in civilian houses by Hamas terrorists. So we know that Hamas has completely militarized every part of the Gaza, and that when we try to attack a terrorist, and there's a group of terrorists or a large number of terrorists hiding inside a house, and unfortunately there are civilians in the area, sometimes those civilians are killed, and that's a tragedy. But Hamas is deliberately putting itself behind civilians so that there will be a high civilian toll. We are doing everything. We are doing more than any country has ever done in history to avoid innocent civilian casualties. That has been proven, and that has been proven by British military experts, by American military experts, by world military experts have said they have never ever seen in the history of warfare a country take the steps that Israel has taken to avoid civilian casualty.
Right. France believes that Israel is committing genocide, and that's the reason why recently France's President Emmanuel Macron came out clearly to state that there should be an arms embargo on your country. How do you react to that?
Well, President Macron never accused us of genocide. President Macron made statements about how we were operating and how we were doing the war in Gaza specifically. And I fundamentally reject that. I disagree with that. I think that President Macron is wrong. My Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke with President Macron and explained to him why the decision to limit certain arms to Israel is not only morally wrong, but it is dangerous, and it encourages Iran, it encourages Hamas, it encourages Hezbollah, and it encourages terrorism around the world. But absolutely, they did not accuse Israel of genocide. Israel is not carrying out genocide. There's a very clear definition of genocide, and Israel is not doing it. There is absolutely no basis for that accusation. It is outrageous, and it is not based on any form of fact.
Okay, where do we go from here? I mean, Israel is fighting on different fronts, Hamas, Hezbollah, and with the campaign so far, Israeli authorities have actually eliminated the authorities, especially as it concerns the heads across board when it comes to Hezbollah. I'm wondering, what stops this fight? For instance, if there is some sort of communication across board, what exactly would happen now? And Israel says, well, you know what, let's stop this particular fight.
On the Lebanese front, there would need to be a commitment by the world to implement UN Resolution 1701. In 2006, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1701, calling on Hezbollah's fighters to be north of the Litani River. It's about 15 kilometers from the Israeli border, where they could no longer pose a direct threat to Israeli communities, and that they should disarm. Since 2006, the world has done nothing to implement that resolution. The world needs to implement that resolution. If the world wants to see a ceasefire, it must be implemented. If 1701 is implemented, that will be the end of the conflict on the northern border. When Hezbollah withdraw to the Litani River and they agree to be disarmed, that will be the end. With regards to Gaza, very simple. Hamas needs to return our hostages, and we need to make sure that Hamas can never carry out this massacre again. Yesterday, Hamas put out an announcement saying they are proud and pleased of what they did on October the 7th. And from their perspective, they get an opportunity, they will carry it out again. So clearly we need to degrade their ability and make sure they can never do it again. But primarily we need to return the hostages. And ultimately, this is all being directed and all being sponsored and all being run by Iran. And so we need to put international pressure on Iran. We need to put heavy sanctions on Iran to ensure that Iran stops its behavior and stops carrying out the activities that it's doing and stops sponsoring terror organizations in the Middle East and stops spreading its instability in the Middle East, in the Arabian Gulf, and also in Africa and West Africa in particular.
All right, on a final note, just before we let you go, Iran, for the first time in a long while, had a direct attack, throwing in 180 missiles into Israel. How are you looking to respond to that?
Israel is an independent country, and when any country has rockets fired at it, 180 ballistic missiles, that's the largest ballistic missile attack on a country in history of the world. There is nobody that would accept that and not respond. And Israel will respond. We will respond in a proportional way. We will respond in an appropriate way. And we will do so in consultation with our allies and with our friends. But we will absolutely respond to this outrageous attack that the world said to Iran, do not do. The world said to Iran, do not attack Israel. Do not fire rockets at Israel. There will be serious consequences if you do so. It can lead to very, very serious situation. It could lead even potentially to a regional war. Israel will respond. But Iran didn't listen. Iran attacked. Iran fired missiles on our civilian population. And Israel will respond. And Israel will find the right way, the right time, the right place, and the right proportional way to respond.
All right. Thank you so much, Freeman, for your time this morning. We truly appreciate you.
Thank you very much.